Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Juliet Zingler, and welcome to week 14 of History of Rock and Roll. And this week we're talking about heavy metal, rap, and indie rock in greater detail. So, first of all, I want to highlight what you're doing this week for class. You don't have a whole lot to do. You're working on a discussion question, and you can choose any song of your choice from these genres we've been studying, back to punk, new wave, grunge, rap, heavy metal, and then you'll answer another student's response as well. So your own thoughts and another student's thoughts that you'll respond to is what you want to do there. So I want to give you plenty of time to finish up your research projects, which, as you know, can take a number of different forms. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. The important thing for your research projects is that it be very high quality and show that you've put some great thought and research into it. I'm asking that you use 5 different sources, and it can take a number of different formats. I've outlined them down in the syllabus and right here on the slide. But basically, it could be a written report, or it could be a slide, a videotape of yourself presenting slides. It could be a combination where you have a written report with access to media materials. And really, if you're going to write about a musical topic, it's terrific. It's really par for the course to include musical samples. So please do include those musical samples. If you have any questions, please contact me. Well, here's a little bit of an overview about Chapter 12. We have in the field of heavy metal some very prominent artists popping up already at the end of the 70s. You have Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath leading the way, and then Van Halen in the early 80s and Guns N' Roses, Bon Jovi, and Metallica in the mid to late 80s. Then we also see rap developing out of hip-hop, a dance form originally in New York City, and artists like Grandmaster Flash and Africa Bambaataa are key to know in that genre. Def Jam is a leader in producing and creating crossover appeal. We'll talk a little bit more about Run DMC and Aerosmith as we go along. Then rap becomes more reflective of black urban culture later in the decade. Finally, we have indie rock, and the indie rock scene is being helped by college radio stations who don't have as many restrictions about what to play as public radio stations and private radio stations. All right, so heavy metal, let's talk a little bit about this. Well, you know it's a heavy metal song if you hear driving riffs, dark themes, extended guitar solos. And I want to emphasize that heavy metal was meant as another type of simplistic response to the progressive rock of the 70s. Metal artists wanted to say, hey, we just want to make it simple, but we do want it to have this driving sound. And a key element of that is the power chord. I don't know if you know what a power chord is, but basically, when you play a chord, you're playing the first tone of the scale, the third, and the fifth of the scale, 3 notes together. And if you double anything, if you play any of those twice, usually it's the first tone of the scale, the tonic note of the scale. But in a power chord, what you do is you double the fifth, and it gives it a different feeling, a heavier feeling. And so you hear a lot of power chords being played in heavy metal music. So because it was meant to be simplistic at first, it had kind of a blue-collar appeal. And that's really an oversimplification of the genre, because we see as the decade goes along that the music becomes more complicated. And now rap has combined with so many diverse genres that it can really sound like almost anything. Black Sabbath is the earliest band of this genre. They take kind of a goth approach to their song stylings. And if you want to hear a great rendition of Iron Man featuring Ozzy Osbourne, don't look for the Black Sabbath rendition of it. Go to the 2009 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame concert. It's a great concert. I hope you can watch the whole thing. But Metallica is paired with Ozzy Osbourne as his backup band. And it's a treat because Metallica, those band members are just about a decade later than Osbourne. They grew up listening to Osbourne. And you can tell that they're just thrilled to be playing on the same stage with their idol, Ozzy Osbourne. It's a great rendition of Iron Man. We've got groups like Motley Crue with their song Shout at the Devil from 1983. And what's interesting about this song is you can hear a little bit of the chorus at the beginning before the verse starts, and then the chorus returns. So that brief statement of the chorus acts as kind of a hook for the whole song. And they're a fun group to watch because they've got the big hair too in this video from 1983. Right, so the big hair thing, I think this is a particular contribution of American bands more than British bands, but it seemed like the American bands just had more stage presence, so they were rocking the big hair and the skin-tight leggings and that sort of thing in the heavy metal genre. Flash pots on stage to provide some spectacle. And if you look at the band Poison, their song Talk Dirty to Me exemplifies this. So the song features driving guitar solos. There are also some lyrics that are kind of sexist, kind of offensive to women. It's a great song, though, from 1987, and have a listen because I think you'll enjoy that song. Then by the end of the 80s, we have groups like Metallica that are trending more towards a serious musical approach. So Metallica, great ensemble, really tight ensemble with a terrific guitarists all the way around and a great drummer. If you listen to their song One from 1989, you're going to hear that it's a two-part song. It starts out really slowly, and then it just keeps building in intensity and complexity. And to do this, they've drawn in great measure from progressive rock of the 70s, which of course was influenced by psychedelic rock of the 60s. I hope you get to listen to Metallica's song One from 1989. Let's talk a little bit about rap as well. I know last week I linked you to a couple of different artists, especially Dougie Fresh, and I'll talk a little bit more about him, but it's really helpful to understand that rap grew out of hip-hop. So originally hip-hop was a term that just described dance music, and these were dance parties that were created in New York City, and they were often held at a community center, or perhaps in someone's houses. It was more likely that it was in a community center or a rented venue. And these DJs would come in with their record collections. And these were highly treasured, highly prized record collections. You wouldn't share this with anyone. You wanted to be original. So you might have a record whose A-side had been on the radio and everybody knew it. But it might have a great B-side that had terrific dance music. So, if you had enough money to invest in these records, you could find these recordings that no one else had and create a sensational dance party. So at these dance parties, DJs were using two turntables because, that's the way that records work. They end, and as one ended, you could start another song on the other turntable. You could also adjust the tempo on these turntables. So you could start the second song on the second turntable at the same tempo as the first song so that you'd have no break in the rhythm for the dancing. And then you could bring it into the tempo that was really needed for the song. And as they were using these dual turntables, DJs began to find they could do different effects like scratching, when you hear that rhythmic scratching sound. That's because literally they were manipulating the record so that it would have this scratchy feedback sound on the turntable with the stylus on the record itself. So as the art form developed, what happened was during these dance parties, when they were transitioning from one song to the other, somebody would be speaking over these transitions between songs and shouting out to people, complimenting people, making the guys sound that they were really attractive to the ladies and the ladies to the men. And those little breaks between songs began to expand and become like the featured attraction, the most interesting part, until finally we had rap songs. So as rap becomes a thing, it goes through transitions too. And what you find is these early rap artists are sharing some similar rhymes, but they're also creating original rhymes, and originality is highly prized in rap. So when we hear the group Sugar Hill Gang sing Rapper's Delight in 1980, we can see that they're using a rap rhyme that was used by a lot of different groups at that time. Let me just quote it. I said a hip, a hop, the hippie, a hip hop, papa, you don't stop the rock. Right? You hear that the word hip hop right in there, and the hip hop refers to the dance moves that they're doing. But by the time you get to Rapper's Delight in 1980, this rap has become the featured attraction, even though you can see in the dance styles and the style of the clothing, etc., it's still heavily influenced by disco. But as we move through the 80s, rap transitions towards more truth-telling about inner city life. And by the time we get to the late 80s, we find that it's finally made it into the mainstream, into a kind of crossover appeal. And one song is particularly important with this. It's Run DMC's collaboration with the heavy metal group Aerosmith on Walk This Way, Walk This Way. I'm not going to play it for you, but you should look it up because it's a great video that was shown on MTV. And literally in the video, you can see the two groups in a studio separated by a wall. And Run DMC is banging on the wall and saying, "You're too loud over there." Because, you know, that's a feature of heavy metal music. It's extremely loud. And finally, they break down the wall and the two bands are singing together. At first, Aerosmith is kind of like, who are these guys? And then they're jamming together on the song. And that is something that Aerosmith did to their credit. They kind of reinvented themselves in the 80s by revamping their sound, including collaborating with this heavy metal group. And they became even more popular than they were in the 70s by the time we got to the 80s. Well, you find artists like Ice-T taking rap to the West Coast, and as it moves to the West Coast, it becomes more gang-oriented and more violence. And of course, I'm sure you know that there have been a lot of incidences of violence and even deaths in the rap world. So there are pros and cons, I think, to the art form. The great thing is that it allows platform for people to tell their truth. And then the negative aspect is, you know, there's still violence in the rap field, although it has died down somewhat in the last 10 years. Well, rap floods into all major U.S. cities by about the early 2000s, and then it goes global by the 2010s. There are a lot of great global artists. One in my mind is Bad Bunny, because he's the favorite of a friend of mine. And I just heard an interview with him by Trevor Noah on The Daily Show, where he was talking about the goals of his music. He described it as wanting to unite people through his music, and I respect that goal. Ice-T has a great movie out called The Art of Rap, and I've linked you to part of it last week with that clip of Dougie Fresh, who was like the original beatboxer. But there are many more artists on this, including some of those I've mentioned, like Melly Mel, Grandmaster Flash, Africa Bambaataa, who are talking about how they make their raps. So if you want to access that, I found it on Amazon Prime Video, but you can find it in other sources as well. It's a really great video to watch to be able to understand rap a little bit more. And I just want to say a quick word about beatboxing. You know, as they were using those dual turntables and scratching and using other technological effects, groups found that they could recreate those sounds with their singing voices. So Dougie Fresh was one of the original beatboxer who was recreating those dual turntable sounds. And as we move through the 80s, we're changing from analog technology to digital technology. So by the time we get to the 90s, then there's no real need for beatboxing, because artists can just sample a whole song. They can just lift a whole song and erase the vocals and lay their own vocals over it. and that becomes the new format for rap. All right, I hope you have a great week, and I'm looking forward to your discussion responses. Goodbye now.